talked about interpretation of text and how young ministers can be more responsible in how we interpret the text and what we are presenting to the people. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I mean, I think that that is probably the most critical element in preaching, interpretation. And interpretation doesn't mean, in my view, you know, that you just say what you want to say, or that the text is just wide open for this or wide open for that. No, interpretation, I think, comes with it the development of certain skills of reading a text, first of all, allowing the spirit of the text to converge with your own spirit. Every time you read a text, I think the breath of God is empowering you, you know. And I think you should read a text with a certain degree of understanding. Now, I do have a little bit of criticism about those who teach biblical studies and who don't focus on helping the students understand that the text should lead to a great sermon. Now, what that means, in my view, is that the historical critical method is important, yes. We need to use the historical critical method as well, but it is not the most important thing from my perspective. And that's what I talk to my students about. In other words, unlike this notion that the meaning of the text is behind it, or the meaning of the text is found in what the author meant or what the author intended, all of that may be important and so forth. But I subscribe to this notion that the meaning of the text is in front of it, a rather modern, Recurian notion that the meaning of the text is in front of it. Now, I take that to be very liberating in the sense that no matter what has been said about that text previously, that the preacher today, you as the preacher, I as the preacher, Professor Sanders as the preacher, we have an opportunity now to say something about that text that has never been said before. We have an opportunity to develop meaning and to get at what this text means for us today. Not just what it meant in the past, not just what it meant to the author who wrote it, but what it means to us today. Because oftentimes, I believe that the preacher can understand a text better than the person who wrote it. And I also believe that if you work at it hard enough, okay, you can get in front of that text and you can write a sermon on this text better than any that has ever been written before. That's the liberation element in this notion by Paul Ricoeur, that the meaning of the text is in front of it. Okay? And so this is what I encourage my students to do, to try to get in front of the text and all of that. It's very important for us to understand. Now, I know, I mean, Dr. Sanders is one of our language professors, Greek language professor, and so forth, and that may be important, and all of that. But I'm saying that black people, slaves, couldn't even read the English language, could interpret text in ways that led to liberation, transformation, and freedom. Okay? And it's something about that that is very intriguing and very exciting to me about, you know, about a lot of our slave ancestors, a lot of the people who preached the word could discern certain things about text, just like they could discern certain things, you know, about the slave master and about other folks. So all of these things, I think that a lot of our people have had a sixth sense for understanding text, and I think that's very critical and very, very important. But I also think that, you know, we're not in the business, I'm not in the business of obviating anything. I'm not in the business of saying that the historical critical method is not important, because I think it is. I think any tool that we can bring to the text and to interpreting the text should be used. Okay? It's just that, from my perspective, you know, these things like the intent of the author and stuff like that. That's not sacrosanct from where I sit.
Yeah, I would agree, you know, with Dr. Harris, that out in front of the text is where the focus should be. The question for me is what's out there in front of the text. And that's why I have said on occasions that the great text is before you in the lives of the people that you are speaking to. That's a text, you know, in a broader sense, you know, of the term. Texts are not just written. Texts are human beings in need of some self-understanding, some clarification, you know, that is needed within the congregation in terms of problems that people might have. And even when we deal with the whole issue of historical criticism, if you look, as I say to my Greek students from time to time, if you look at a critical apparatus, at the bottom it tells us how fluid the text was in the early church period. So many manuscripts, so many disagreements. Some things are missing, some things are added. And so the text was never understood as some kind of sacred artifact from the very beginning. It was not that simple. It was a fluid situation until it became fixed. And once it was fixed, it became sacrosanct. I guess that's the good. It was sacrosanct. And then, but then, moving on from that point, from the time it was fixed, we are now in the 27th edition or so. Maybe the 28th and 9th will come of the Greek translation or the Greek text, which means the text is not even fixed yet. You see, so I think that it's there's great room for a preacher to be very creative, even with a so-called fixed text, in order to allow that text. In other words, the text itself gives guidance itself in terms of speaking to people out in front of the text. It really does that.
And the text should cause us, it should cause some angst in us, or some consternation to some degree. In other words, we read the text, we should allow the text to interrogate us, and we should interrogate the text as well. And, you know, I mean, if like one of my professors used to say, if the text is very clear to you, then you need to just move on to another text. You know, I just think that we need, as students and as teachers, we need to focus on encouraging our students just to work hard at interpretation. I prefer using the word interpretation. Dr. Sanders touched on this, you know, in the sense that, you know, that I think the issue is critical, and that it's okay to be critical. I mean, you know, our education in and of itself is for the development of a kind of critical consciousness. We need to be conscious of some things that's going on in our churches, in our communities, in our lives, in ourselves. And the only way that's going to happen is that we have to be critical, and we have to take a critical look, okay?
And then I think that when we are very critical, we can see all of this, that diversity that was there, you know, in the world, and that the church for a long time could not even decide on a sacred text as to what that should be. Now on this side, there are people who are well grounded in this rather narrow parochial idea that this is fixed and it dropped down from the sky, just as we have it today. They really bank on that. But I think there are gaps there and crevices that the preacher can work in to see, in some sense, that there's a whole new world that is offered to us. That the text is really, in a sense, not a hindrance, but it is a kind of nudge to move forward in creativity.